ようこそ砂と黄金の国エジプトへ。はいどうも、お初にお目にかかります。地球上のすべての生きとし生きる者の嫌われ者キモいマン37と申します。よろしくお願いいたします。というわけでして、今回ですねお送りさせていただきます。タイトルはこちら、アサシンクリードオリジンズディスカバリーツアーというわけでして、今回で、動画本数的に言うと17本目ということで、今回頑張ってね、頑張ってっていうか楽しくね、こちらの、ナビゲーターハシナちゃんとともに、古代エジプトのねこの国がエジプトの世界を、楽しくね、旅していけたらいいなと思います。はい。で、ですね、そうですね、ごめんなさいね。ディスカバリーツアーですね、やらせていただくときは、毎回ノーマイクでね、やらせていただいておりますので、今回もノーマイクでやらせていただきたいなと思います。また、割しなにですね、ご挨拶の方をさせていただきたいなと思いますので、何卒ご理解ご了承のほどよろしくお願いいたします。で、今回ですね、旅していく、スポットは、メンフィス、ですね。こちらのメンフィスですね。メンフィスをちょっと今回は、旅していくと。ここと、ここと、あとはここですね。3箇所あるんで、まあ結構どれもこれもね、ボリュームが結構あるんでね、今回1本では多分収まらないなと思うんで、今回ね、じっくりね、3本やっていきたいなと思います。では、もしよろしければね、最後の最後までお付き合いくださいませ。よろしくお願いいたします。ではまた後ほど。See you soon. バイバイ。
Welcome to Mummies of Ancient Egypt. The mummification process used by ancient Egyptians was highly ceremonial in nature. The different types of mummification took into account the social level and richness of the deceased and even included animals. The most expensive was that reserved for the pharaoh and the royal family, as well as some of the wealthiest members of the court. The first step was cleaning. Once bodies arrived at the mummification site, they were placed on inclined tables while the bodily fluids drained away. They were then cleansed by priests until they were deemed ready for the purification process. The purification of the body began with a libation from sacred water. The priest then fumigated the body with terebinth resin. After the ritual cleansing, priests used oils, spices, and all kinds of essences to further purify the body of the deceased. Finally, all body hair was meticulously removed. Once the body was properly purified, embalmers removed the organs, following very specific procedures. First, the brain was extracted by inserting a spoon through the nostril to break the ethmoid bone. Then, using a spatula, the pieces of the brain were removed as thoroughly as possible. What matter remained was extracted after a process of liquefaction, achieved through the use of a caustic liquid. The cranial box, once emptied, was rinsed and disinfected with palm wine, and then stuffed with strips of linen cloth and liquefied resin. After taking care of the brain, embalmers made an incision on the left flank and carefully set aside the viscera. The inside of the body was also rinsed with palm wine. Then the embalmers filled the belly with pure myrrh, cinnamon, and other perfumes, and sewed it shut. The removed viscera were washed in palm wine and packed in crushed herbs before being placed in canopic jars. Canopic jars were placed close to the sarcophagus or kept in a chest nearby. At first, the viscera were wrapped in tissue and placed in the vases. As the ritual requirements became more elaborate, ointments, spices, and even water and natron were added to the process. Towards the middle of the New Kingdom, canopic jars assumed the appearance of the four sons of Horus. They were known as the protectors of the viscera. These protectors had their own guardians, each a goddess of the dead. Imseti, the human-headed god, protected the liver and was protected by the goddess Iset. Hapi, the baboon-headed god, protected the lungs and was protected by the goddess Nephthys. Dumutef, the jackal-headed god, protected the stomach and was protected by the goddess Neith. And finally, Kebesenuef, the falcon-headed god, protected the intestines and was protected by the goddess Selket. Natron is a naturally occurring mineral found in evaporite. These sedimentary rocks are made up of mineral salts and were generally mined from lake beds in Egypt. Embalmers used natron as a desiccant to dry the flesh and stop the corpse's putrefaction process. Once the body was cleansed and eviscerated, the deceased was covered in natron for about 40 days. Once desiccated, the body was prepared to be wrapped in strips of linen. Once the body was fully desiccated by the natron treatment, embalmers oiled, painted, and sometimes even added hair extensions or a wig. They often used a henna-based antiseptic preparation to give the body a more colorful and lively appearance while preparing it to resist molds and fungi. Next came the phase which gave mummies their most well-known appearance, the wrapping. Originally, each part of the body was wrapped separately. Men had their arms crossed on their chests, while women had the right arm folded over their breasts and the left arm stretched along the body. However, techniques evolved over time. Eventually, the body as a whole was wrapped with limbs alongside the body, and increasingly sophisticated and different techniques of weaving flax bands were developed. In addition to the jewelry and amulets arranged on the skin of the deceased, amulets were also carefully inserted into the weaving of the linen strips. Each amulet was linked to a myth, or to an ideological belief related to rebirth. Masks were an important part of a mummy's finery. Early wooden funeral coverings were very expensive, however, and soon replaced by masks created through a technique known as cartonnage. Masks fashioned with this method were created by laying several layers of linen or papyrus pulp on a base made of mud or straw. Cartonnage was used for more than funerary masks. Ornaments and the animal coffins of the late period were also made in such a fashion. Cartonnage evolved to cover the entire body of the mummy during the 22nd dynasty. The mummies were placed on a board inside a rigid envelope of cartonnage, which was laced at the back with a string. Extremely cost-effective and visually pleasing, this technique was very popular through all layers of the society. Cartonnage envelopes were usually covered with inscriptions and polychrome decorations, specifying the names and titles of the deceased, scenes depicting daily life, or decorations specific to the funerary world. This was a true gift for Egyptologists eager to study the funerary rites of the ancient Egyptians. Once the mummy was properly wrapped and adorned, the embalmers proceeded with the ceremony of the opening of the mouth. A vital step of the funerary process, this ceremony was meant to bring back to life the deceased themselves, or an object representing the deceased. There were no less than 75 different stages for the opening of the mouth. It required the application of the same oils, ointments, spices, and perfumes used during the mummification process. Makeup was sometimes part of the process as well. The last stage of this long ritual was the act of touching the mouth with the adze to symbolically allow the breath of life to infuse an inert body. Its performance was reserved for a very specific set of people: priests who wore the mask of the god Anubis, a close relative of the family, or by the heir to the throne. Welcome to Artisans of Ancient Egypt. It was under the watchful eye of Ptah of Memphis, the god of craft and architecture, that ancient Egyptians developed the unique rendition of the world they lived in. However, it is vital to understand that their view of art, and those who created it, was likely very dissimilar to the modern concept of the word. Instead of artists, the creative culture had skilled and respected artisans. The most significant categories of specialties for crafters were drawing, painting, sculpture, and metalworking. Ancient Egyptian craftspeople created both art and a wide variety of mundane, everyday tools. Every item created had a specific purpose and was produced by anonymous artisans who worked alone or with a team. Most crafts, such as pottery and metalworking, were utilized for everyday items. Luxury goods and artwork illustrations served temple rituals and were not meant for public display. Artisans rarely signed their names to the work, though they were clearly aware that they possessed a unique skill and talent for the task. Art, in all its forms, has offered not only a practical insight into the way ancient Egyptians lived, but in how they viewed the world and their place in it. The balance of order and chaos was crucial in both the physical and the metaphysical universes. As a result, their art appears to follow a strict set of stylistic conventions that supported this worldview. From households and palaces to temples and tombs, pottery, papyrus, and textile items were essential to the everyday life of ancient Egyptians. In ancient Egyptian culture, drawing was used as illustration, such as seen in the Book of the Dead. It was also the first step in the creation of a relief, painting, or statue. Two-dimensional representations were concerned with order and form, and were intended to honor gods and promote the transition of the soul to the afterlife. Stylistically, Egyptians were concerned with the depiction of the human form's inner self. As such, artistic representations were not concerned with realism, but rather with idealized youth and perfectly harmonious visuals. An exception to this were scenes depicting hunting and battle, where the environment and enemies moved in lively, even chaotic ways. Animals and foes were depicted piled up, as if describing chaos, with Egyptians standing in solemn, disciplined poses, bringing order to the scene. Reliefs could be either in high relief or low relief. Either method required a surface suited to the desired technique. Preparation of the surfaces differed depending on the quality of the rock. A quarried block only needed a simple smoothing. Rough-cut rock monuments, such as those found in tombs, required more work. Often the surface was coated in plaster before being sculpted. For reliefs, preliminary sketches were drawn in red, then framed with a red grid to position the elements of the scenes. Corrected sketches were in black, and once approved, the scene was ready to be carved. This method likely explains the name given to relief makers, the one who draws the outlines. Statues were believed to be vessels for the souls of the deceased, or deities. That is why a sculptor was called the one who makes it live. This divine duty earned them the utmost respect. As with a relief, creation of a sculpture began with a drawing. Most statues were made of quarried blocks of stone, primarily limestone, though sometimes harder stones such as quartzite were also used. In ancient Egypt, the profession of crafter was organized and relied on a specific hierarchy. Most artisans depended on an institution to provide them with raw materials. There were 3 working levels for craftsmanship: domestic, large estates, and within palace and temple workshops. Some royal workshops, at their largest, covered an area of about 2.8 square kilometers in size. At the domestic level, most Egyptians were craftspeople to a greater or lesser extent. The ability to repair tools was a daily necessity. Crafted everyday items could also be bartered for at the local market. Artisans with skills but lacking in resources worked at large estates, where the elite provided them with space to work and raw materials. The most skilled artisans were employed in royal or temple projects and benefited from a special status. They were provided with good workspaces and considered to be highly skilled. An ancient text known as the Satires of Trades has a number of descriptive summaries that offer teasing glimpses into how artisans were perceived. A coppersmith was said to stink and have fingers that resembled crocodile droppings, while potters were said to be like those who lived in bogs. This view was likely exaggerated in order to highlight the most enviable position of all, that of the scribe. Located near the Valley of the Kings, Deir el-Medina was a settlement created by order of the king to honor the most skilled artisans. Its name translates as the monastery of the city. Allocated a house on the initiative of the king, these craftsfolk were regarded with respect and referred to as the royal artisans. Those who lived there worked on the tombs in the Valley of the Kings and its surrounding temples. Archaeologists believe the site was home to skilled and respected artisans for over 400 years. It is considered one of the most important discoveries relating to Egyptian daily life. While much of the focus of Egyptian archaeology was on its kings and queens, it wasn't until the excavation of Deir el-Medina that Egyptologists were given a valuable window into the community life of ancient Egyptian artisans.
はい、というわけでして、今回ですね、切り目良さそうなので、この辺で終了させていただきたいなと思います。ここまでご視聴いただきまして、誠にありがとうございました。そして、ここまでお付き合いくださいまして、お疲れ様でした。ありがとうございました。今回ですね、ミイラに関する、文化と、あとは芸術とかね、美術に関する、 勉強をね、させていただきました。いやね、結構そのミイラの製法に関してはね、結構テレビのね、番組なんかでたまに視聴したりはしたんですが、やっぱり細かいね、その製法っていうか、初めから、完成に至るまでのプロセスっていうのがね、具体的な情報っていうのがあんまりよく分かってなかったので、今回ね、それで端的にでもね、学ぶことができたのは、すごくね、良かったなと思いました。で、やっぱりね、エジプトのね、なんていうか、そのきらびやかな、美術、芸術、そういったことがね、なんていうんでしょう、根底に流れるものっていうものもね、これはまた端的にね、知ることができたのが、すごく楽しかったなと思いましたね。また次回がね、どんな、ことを学ばせてくれるのか、非常に楽しみだなと思いますね。はい。で、ですね、自分ですね、これ以外にもシリーズ動画ですね、いくつか出させていただいておりまして、まず、アサシンクリードオリジンズ DLC 隠れし者、ウィッチャー3ワイルドハント、狼絶景版に、ファイナルファンタジー15、あとは、シャーロック・ホームズ悪魔の娘と、死因ですね。で、あとはザ・シルバーケースと、出させていただいております。で、それ以外にですね、不定期なんですが、ニコ生と YouTube の方で、ブロードキャスト配信させていただいております。で、ブロードキャスト配信させていただくにせよ、今回みたいにね、動画をアップさせていただくにせよ、必ず事前に自分がやらせていただいております、Twitter 等でご報告させていただいております。毎回動画説明欄にですね、自分がやらせていただいております。各種 SNS の、URL をリンクっていう形でもって貼らせていただいております。お気の方がお気になりましたら構いませんので、もしよろしければぜひ、そちらの方もチェックされてみてください。よろしくお願いいたします。で、今回ですね、奇跡的にもこちらの動画をご視聴くださった方の中でね、自分みたいなのでもいいなと思っていただけたらね、構いませんので、チャンネル登録、あと動画の高評価等をぜひよろしくお願いいたします。というわけでして、今回、少々世紀マイマン37がお送りさせていただきました、アサシンクリードオリジンズディスカバリーツアー、動画本数的に言うと17本目ですね。これで終了させていただきたいなと思います。改めまして、ここまでご視聴いただきまして、誠にありがとうございました。そして、ここまでお付き合いくださりまして、お疲れ様でした。ありがとうございました。また次回、18本目ですね、皆様にお会いできることを楽しみに、今回これで失礼させていただきます。ありがとうございました。バイバイ。